Hi everyone, I'm Erika Del Sordo. Welcome to United Country Dix Realty Real Estate Talk. Today with me is a very special gentleman. I have Dennis Price, and he is the one-person band of Southeast Environmental Geology. He does a whole lot for our aquifer system here, and he's going to talk to us about our wetlands here in North Florida. And we even have the map to show you. So this is a really special show. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I'm happy you're here.
Yes.
You've got a whole lot that you can talk about regarding the aquifer system. We're going to also talk about at some point sinkholes, and that's always a question as a realtor. So some people ask about those and what areas those are in. We're also going to talk about the springs because that's a good reason why a lot of people also move here.
Very well, yes.
Let's start talking about your start though in everything. Give me your history.
Okay, well, I graduated from Florida State
Very
back
nice.
in the 1970s after I got out of the military, and got a job at the phosphate mine in 1974
Wow.
doing an exploration geologist,
Wow.
and been living here 50 years now. In April will be 50 years.
So he knows what he's talking about. You're definitely the expert in this. So talk to me about what you think of our aquifer system. What is it doing for North Floridians? How about our residents here and our tourists?
Well, there's somewhat of a crisis going on in the fact that even though we have 1,000, 1,500 feet of fresh water below us, we're probably one of the most prolific aquifers in the world. The first 30, 40 feet of it is what keeps our springs flowing and keeps the ponds, Alligator Lake, when it's not, draining. That's what
Right.
keeps that up. So it's important, and we have been pulling that water down, and not necessarily us in Lake City. We're not the big culprits. The culprits in the past have been the paper mills along the coast in Fernandina and Brunswick, and also the phosphate company up in Hamilton County. They have been pulling fresh water out of the ground by the millions of gallons,
Ooh.
millions and millions of gallons per day.
Wow.
And then Jacksonville itself, because they need a lot of water, and we are simply a giant water tower to them. Our aquifer levels are up 50, 55 feet. They're at sea level. We're extremely transmissive aquifer, which means the water flows readily out of our aquifer, and they're pulling it towards them, and they have been for forever, really. And now they're actually having saltwater intrusion into their wells, and they have been talking about moving their wells closer to the Nassau County, or to the whatever the county is, Jacksonville, Duval County line.
Oh, yes.
So, and when they do that, they'll be even pulling more water from us. And so that's my take on the geology of what's going on with our groundwater.
Take it all away from us?
Well, all these three things that I mentioned have taken enough away that it's hard to get a water use permit from the district for an industry that might use a couple of million gallons a day. And we've had those try to show up here, and then they had to go away. And they actually one of them ended up in McClenny and got a permit from the Water St. John's district, and they're over there pulling the same water they would have pulled if they were here.
Wow.
So it's an odd situation.
That is an odd situation.
Yes.
Wow. And something that we should, I think, be worrying about.
Well, as residents, not necessarily, because we can always get water for our residential type use and small businesses, but the springs would be an issue, because what drives the springs is the height of the water level up in northern Columbia County. And the lower they get, the less the spring is going to flow in volume.
Not good.
And which is why White Springs doesn't flow anymore. The water levels have dropped far enough that they rarely flow.
I'm learning a whole lot. I didn't know that.
Yes, and so they're flowing more often now, but it's still tannic water. It's not coming out as the clean, clear water that we usually expect to see out of a spring.
Wow.
And I would say that if you were to take a 100-year-old man, go down to the Issatukney, even though we think it's so pristine and beautiful, that guy would look at that if he was very familiar with it when he was a kid, and he'd go, "Man, what have you done to the springs?" You
I'm
know,
sure.
it's just a perspective of what it used to be and what it is now,
Right.
and we still think it's great.
Wow. Is there anything that we can do as residents and tourists visiting the springs, or how to keep them maintained, if you will, or how to?
Not really. I mean, it really is a groundwater-driven
Yeah.
regime.
There's
And,
nothing we can do.
well, actually, as far as the water quality goes, we are doing a lot. The Columbia County is very progressive in, identifying the areas that drain to the Tuckney, and they have in the past moved all their wastewater from the sewage treatment plant into a spray field, which helps reduce the nutrients. So Columbia County are really proud to say have recognized the value of our lakes and rivers and ponds and springs.
That's good.
Yes.
Well, that's very good.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then we can just keep tubing and canoeing
Yes.
down them. We'll just keep having fun in them. But this
Yes.
is very important. I didn't even realize that we had, Jacksonville and those counties kind of borrowing essentially our water.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, it's,
I wish they'd give it back.
yeah.
Right?
That would be nice.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Let's go into our second topic of discussion, and that is, as a realtor, sometimes people ask about sinkholes in the area. Are there particular spots that are more susceptible to those? Have you experienced them yourself?
I have, when I used to work for the state, I worked for the Department of Environmental Protection and the Swanee River Water Management District in my time here.
Oh, wow.
And during those periods, I was the person they would call to go out on sinkhole patrol, so to say. And that would be a resident would complain, we're curious about why the ground's dropping, and I would go out and evaluate and
Right.
give them some advice if necessary. And so overall, all of our over the thousands and thousands of years, our topography, our landforms, what you see when you drive around, have been shaped by the limestone dissolving. In some respects, it dissolves catastrophically, like in Central Florida, where you see the big sinkholes that just drop in and cars fall in. Those haven't happened around here. It's more of a gentle movement, and it usually occurs in where you've already can see a depression. And this map is a good example of areas that
Let's take a peek.
would be. I don't want to be a scary person here and say watch out, but if this whole green area is really a result of this, limestone dissolving. There are lots and lots of sinkholes all through this area. The orange area is more of our areas where there's a lot of wetlands, and those wetlands are there. It's also a much higher elevation.
Okay.
And so there's a whole geologic layer up here that doesn't exist down here. And that's been eroded away. And up here it's a sand, clay layer. And it holds the water up and it doesn't let it percolate through. There are areas where that has happened, like Ocean Pond over here is a sinkhole lake, and it's collapsed in. But that clay, it's called the Hawthorne Formation, which is what they mine all the phosphate out of in Florida. And so Lake DeSoto, that little tiny dot there, Alligator Lake is a sinkhole lake. All these lakes are sinkhole lakes, but you can see a lot of them occurring in these close to the edge of the orange.
Right.
And
Right.
there's a few over here that occur in the orange. The Palestine Lake is down there. But yeah, this is basically Columbia County.
Okay.
And this line here is the area that, if you would put water in the groundwater here, it would come out at the Tuckney Springs for the most part.
Oh.
So this is the contributing area to water to the springs. To go back to what our aquifer's doing, there was a time when, I'll put it this way, above this line, water's flowing in another direction. But at higher water level elevations like we had many, many years ago, this line would be way up into northern Columbia County and Hamilton County,
Okay.
and it'd be such a higher elevation that the spring itself would be flowing at a higher elevation, a bigger volume.
Oh.
So this is our contributing area to Ishtuckney Springs. The green is more the area that's prone to subsidence. I don't recall any real catastrophic type collapses that I've ever seen. You know,
Okay.
maybe one or two,
Okay.
and they're usually over. Those were over in Suwannee County around, you know, farms that irrigate and pull a lot of groundwater out.
Okay.
So, and they're already depressing the groundwater temporarily.
Huh.
So those were would
Okay.
be the biggest ones. Yes.
Wow. So I hope everyone can see the map. This would be Lake City. And again, this is pretty much Columbia County. Sewanee's over here, Union County. And the Ishtuckney Springs State Park would be right here, just in case someone can't read, you know,
Right.
what's happening. Okay.
And in this picture, you can see how the Ishtuckney Springs used to be a river that went all the way up into Columbia, up to Alligator Lake area.
Wow.
And as sea levels drop, you know, the water levels drop. It's a perfect example of what happens when water levels drop, is that
Right.
water keeps coming out at a lower and lower elevation. And
Wow.
this is called the Ishtuckney Trace. And Columbia County has really gone out and put signs and they're telling you, you know, this flows to Ishtuckney Springs and this flows, and just mainly making people aware of what they're dumping on the ground.
Right. Well, that's what I meant exactly. So that's a lot to know about sinkholes and you know a lot of information about what's going on in Columbia County. But talk to me now, Dennis, about the wetlands and explain to me really what is happening in North Florida with the wetlands.
Well, generally speaking, the green area is on this map in Columbia County, and it goes all the way into Suwannee County and Alachua. The green areas are where there's a lot less wetlands.
Okay.
And the orange areas are going to be where there are a lot of wetlands.
Oh, wow.
And that
Okay.
would be where one of the maps would come in to show all those wetlands.
Okay.
And there are so many wetlands, if you were just do a broad picture of where the wetlands at in Columbia County, this area all the way to the Georgia border would just be nothing but wetlands.
Mm-hmm.
And which is why people don't generally develop big land developments up there.
Oh.
This is a lot
That's good to
drier,
know.
and therefore it's easier to develop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And people who have wetlands and they want to, this is one thing Columbia County does do, you know, they require a landowner to locate wetlands on their property. The state has maps that shows basically where a wetland could be.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then they require somebody to go out there and identify the wetland, and then you have to show where your house is going to be, so that, and you have to stay 35 feet away from that wetland.
Okay.
So, you know, so the county is protecting wetlands in that respect by making homeowners know where they're at.
Well, this
and,
is good.
and stay away from them, yes.
That's good. We just recently had the 100-year flood plan changed as well, right? That has come into recent. Some places that were not in a flood zone are now in a flood zone, and I'm assuming that you know has a lot to do with the wetlands and how everything is maybe changing.
Well, I would put it this way. People ask me, you know, if it's got a floodplain on it, and I go, yes, but it doesn't necessarily make it a wetland. The floods are going to come out of a wetland, and if it's, you know, a 100-year flood, then it's going to flood into areas that aren't wetlands.
Mm-hmm.
And even a 10-year flood might flood beyond something that's a wetland.
Okay.
So that's a totally different issue of building, you know, constraints.
Okay.
If you're in a floodplain area, you may not be in a wetland.
Okay.
You know,
Well, that's
so
good to know.
yeah.
All right. Totally different. What else do you want to add? What else? What other? You're the expert in this, and you're really like I had mentioned in the beginning. You're a one-man band. There's really no one else who really knows a whole lot about this.
Mm-hmm.
So, what other expertise can you share?
Well, not a whole lot. I think I went through my entire knowledge base right now. So,
Very good.
I would say that's what I've been doing for a living, is being involved in mining and being involved in septic tank issues and being involved in, you know, wetland delineations and mitigation.
Wow.
So, and I've spent my entire career up here in North Florida, and that's what I've concentrated on.
That's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I will have all of Dennis's information in the About section, website, phone number, email, any way that if anyone happens to have any questions, you can contact him directly.
Thanks.
or you can just ask me and I'll ask him.
Yeah, you're the expert now, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for being with me. This is very important that we had you on the show. We've got a lot of we have a lot of realtors, we've got a lot of buyers and sellers watching these shows, and so this was very important. Thank you.
Okay, well, I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah.
It's my pleasure. Have a great day, everyone.
Goodbye.